"No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook," said the shy bride. The rancher's reply changed her life. Wyoming Territory, December 1879. The wind clawed at the worn edges of Powder Creek, a town stitched together with grit and desperation. Snow drifted in lazy spirals over the dried grass and rattling fences, settling heavy on rooftops and shoulders alike. This was the kind of winter that turned breath to frost and men to ghosts. Horses breathed steam. Guns were tucked under coats like promises waiting to be kept. And in a small cabin on the edge of town, where the land sloped down toward the frozen creek, a woman stood alone at a wood-burning stove. Edith Mayburn, age 27, stirred a pot of rabbit stew with calloused hands. The scent of thyme and bone broth filled the cramped space, chasing away the silence that had become her only constant companion. She had lived alone for nearly 5 years, ever since leaving the orphanage, where she learned to bake, boil, and brine in the kitchen that kept her from the cold and from cruel words. People in Powder Creek spoke her name in whispers, when they spoke it at all. "The fat girl in the cabin," they'd say. "Kind heart, poor figure," children pointed. Shopkeepers gave her the worst cuts. She smiled anyway, traded baked bread for buttons and dried herbs, and kept to herself. This morning, the cold felt sharper than usual. Edith pulled her shawl tighter and leaned near the fire when she heard it. 3 hard knocks on the door, not hesitant, not polite. The kind of knock that belonged to a man who did not repeat himself. She hesitated, wiped her hands, opened the door. Standing there was a man wrapped in a thick wool coat, snow clinging to his boots and the brim of his hat. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were sharp, taking in the small cabin, the warmth behind her, and Edith herself. He removed his hat slowly, revealing dark hair flecked with silver at the temples. "Are you Edith Mayburn?" he asked, voice low, edged with weariness. "Yes," she replied, uncertain. "Can I help you?" The man nodded once. "Name's Coulter Grady. I run Grady Ranch west of here. Lost my cook 2 days ago. Sick. Men are hungry and useless when unfed." He paused. "I heard you can cook." Edith's mouth went dry. She glanced back at the bubbling pot behind her, then back to the stranger. His coat was dusted with trail salt, his hands large and weathered, the kind that could break a wild horse or bury a man with equal ease. "I can," she said carefully. He tilted his head. "You cook for 20 cowhands?" Her breath caught. 20? She'd never cooked for more than 6 at a time at the orphanage. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She looked past him into the snowy plains, then down at herself. In the bent reflection of the tin ladle hanging by the door, she saw what others saw: round cheeks, full arms, wide hips, a body shaped more by flour sacks and heavy pots than corsets or courting. Something twisted inside her chest. Years of cruel words surfaced like bruises beneath her skin. She met his eyes, then quickly looked away. "No one marries a fat girl, sir," she whispered, voice barely holding together. "But I can cook." The words hung in the cold air between them, bare and trembling. She expected him to turn away, to offer a curt apology or a dismissive laugh. But Coulter Grady didn't move. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her. Then he said, softly, "I am not hiring a wife, Miss Mayburn. I'm hiring someone who knows how to feed a man in a way that reminds him life's still worth waking up for." Edith blinked. Her hands, still floured from baking biscuits earlier, trembled slightly. She didn't know what to say. Coulter placed his hat back on, nodded once, and turned to go. "I'll be back at first light," he said over his shoulder, "if you're willing." And with that, he walked into the snow, leaving Edith standing in the doorway, the warmth of her hearth reaching no farther than the frame. But something else lingered, his words, heavy, honest. "I'm not hiring a wife. I'm hiring someone who knows how to feed a man in a way that reminds him life's still worth waking up for." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The dawn over Grady Ranch came slow and heavy, pressing down on the land like a wool blanket soaked in ice. The sky was the color of iron, and the wind carried a cruel edge, the kind that cut through coats and cracked lips raw. Snow had fallen in the night, thin and bitter, leaving a dusting across the rooftops and fences. Smoke curled upward from the bunkhouse chimneys, curling like question marks into the gray sky. Edith Mayburn sat in the back of the wagon, hands folded in her lap, heart thudding like a war drum. The driver, a young ranch hand named Will, hadn't spoken much on the ride. He'd merely helped load her trunk, glanced sideways once, and muttered, "Hope you ain't too soft for Grady Ranch." When the wagon rolled to a stop, Edith stepped down into a world that didn't seem to want her. The ranch sprawled wide, 3 barns, a corral thick with cattle, a low-slung bunkhouse, and the main house standing stern at the edge of the horizon like it owned the land and everything breathing on it. Everything here had been built by strong hands and hard years. And now all those strong hands were watching her. The cowhands stood in loose clusters, arms folded, leaning against fence posts or swinging tools to a stop just to stare. Their faces were hard with winter, skin burned by wind and weather. They didn't hide their reactions. "Well, hell," one man chuckled, nudging his friend. "She's gonna eat more than she cooks." Another laughed loud. "Hope we ain't paying by the pound." Edith's cheeks flamed, but she didn't flinch. She didn't run. She held her head high, her gaze steady, and walked straight toward the kitchen house without a word. Her boots crunched in the snow. Her coat flapped at her sides. The whispers followed, but she didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Inside, the kitchen was cold. The fire had long died out. Edith moved like she had always belonged there, opening cabinets, checking stores, dragging logs to the hearth, and striking flint to steel until the fire roared back to life. Her hands, practiced from years at the orphanage and her own small hearth, moved without fear. She unpacked her knives, her spices, her cast-iron skillet. By sunrise the next morning, the air was thick with the scent of roasted cornmeal, crushed chili, and butter melting into hot stone. She'd risen before the sun and set her plan in motion. Cornbread. But not just any. Her signature dish, spicy cornmeal cakes pan-seared in lard, crisp on the outside and warm inside, served with thick cream sauce flecked with smoked pepper and a hint of nutmeg. She laid out 20 plates with practiced grace. The bunkhouse bell rang, boots thundered in. The cowhands clomped into the dining hall laughing, yawning, slapping snow from their coats. Then they smelled it. The room fell strangely quiet. One by one, they picked up their plates. No one said a word, not even the ones who had mocked her yesterday. Edith stood behind the serving table, hands behind her back, watching without blinking. She felt their eyes, but more than that, she watched their mouths. Chewing slowed, heads tilted, eyes widened. No one said anything, until one man, the one who'd made the loudest joke about her weight, walked back, plate scraped clean. He stood there for a beat, awkwardly. Then, without looking her in the eye, he held out his plate again. Said nothing. Just waited. Edith took the plate with quiet hands and spooned him another helping. Still not a word. But as he turned away, she caught the corner of his mouth twitch upward, just slightly. Outside, the sky was still gray. But inside that kitchen, something warmer had begun to rise. The first week passed in a blur of frost-bitten mornings and long, oil-lamp-lit nights. Edith rose before the roosters, often before the moon had fled the sky, and didn't rest until every last pot was scrubbed and the fire-banked embers glowed red in the hearth. But she did more than cook. She watched. She listened. She noticed. Jed, the lanky hand with a crooked nose, didn't like onions in his stew. Amos, the wiry one who rarely spoke, always rubbed his wrist when he ate. She soon realized he had a pepper allergy. And little Sam, no older than 16, always tiptoed into the kitchen past midnight for cold biscuits when he thought no one was looking. She started leaving 2 wrapped in cloth near the edge of the counter. He never said thank you, but the napkin always came back folded neatly by morning. Every man had a story in their silences. and Edith paid attention to all of them. They began to notice. The teasing died down, the jokes faded, and in their place, small gestures bloomed like desert flowers. A buttercup left on the sill. A carved wooden spoon, rough but earnest. Someone fixed the creaky hinge on the back pantry door. No one said they were sorry for how they had treated her, but they didn't have to. Edith knew the language of silence. And kindness, when it came from men who lived by guns and cattle, often came without words. Coulter Grady, for his part, said little. He ate every meal with the hands, always last in line. But every time dinner ended, and the others went off to the barn or bunkhouse, Coulter remained. He rolled up his sleeves, stepped into the scullery, and washed the dishes. Edith tried to stop him once. "You're the boss," she'd said quietly. "You don't have to." "I know what I do," he interrupted, voice low, not unkind. "You fed 'em. I'll clean after 'em." And that was that. They didn't talk much, but she began to know the rhythm of his presence, quiet, steady, unyielding. When he passed her a towel or stacked the pans with care, she felt the strange ache of something she couldn't name, taking root between them. Then came the storm. It blew in like a whisper from the north, then roared down upon the ranch with the fury of a god scorned. The wind howled through the eaves, tearing at the barn doors and sending cattle into a panic. Men shouted. Hooves thundered. Edith stayed behind in the kitchen, bolting shutters, stoking the fire higher. Snow slapped the windows so hard it sounded like fists. That was when she heard it. A sound just barely louder than the wind. A child's voice. Weak. High-pitched. "Hello?" Her heart stopped. She grabbed her shawl, unlatched the door, and braced against the screaming wind. Visibility was near nothing, white chaos whipping around her, but the voice came again, closer now. "Please." Then she saw him. A boy, no older than 7. Skin the color of sun-warmed clay, black hair matted with ice. He wore only a thin shirt and torn moccasins. Edith didn't think. She rushed into the storm, scooped him up, wrapped him in her shawl, and carried him back into the warmth. The door slammed shut behind her. She set him by the fire, his tiny body trembling like a leaf in the gale. "Where are you from?" she whispered, rubbing his arms, trying to get the heat back into his limbs. The boy didn't answer, just shivered and clung to her, wide-eyed. A shadow filled the doorway. Coulter. Snow clung to his coat, his face flushed from the cold, breath ragged. He didn't speak. He just looked, from the boy, to Edith, to the shawl soaked with melting snow. Edith stood protectively, arms around the child. "I heard him," she said softly. I had to." Coulter stepped closer, crouched slowly by the hearth, and reached out a calloused hand to touch the boy's shoulder. "You did right," he said after a moment. His eyes met hers, quiet, steady, unreadable. Then he nodded once and helped build the fire higher. No other words were spoken that night. But for the first time, when Edith looked at Coulter, she didn't see a rancher. She saw a man who had seen her in the storm, and stayed. Morning broke over Grady Ranch in muted shades of silver and blue. The storm had passed, leaving a fragile silence in its wake. Snow blanketed every rooftop, every fence post, every hoofprint, muffling the world into stillness. Inside the kitchen, the fire had burned low. Edith sat near it, wrapped in a quilt she barely remembered fetching, arms still aching from the night before. The child had been taken in by a neighboring Lakota family who'd come looking at dawn. Edith had handed him over gently, the way someone might return a piece of their own heart. Now she sat alone, hands curled around a tin mug of lukewarm tea. She didn't hear Coulter come in, but she felt him. A quiet presence, sure as winter. Then, without a word, he stepped behind her and draped a woolen blanket across her shoulders. It was thick, warm, smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. His hand lingered for the briefest moment before he stepped away. No words, no glances. Just the weight of something gentle, settling between them like snow that didn't melt. After that morning, something began to shift, not all at once, but in small, unspoken ways. They started crossing paths more often. Coulter helped her carry water buckets from the creek when the pump froze. She didn't ask. He simply showed up beside her one morning, grabbed the second pail, and walked in silence. One afternoon, they gathered firewood side by side. Edith slipped in the slush and let out a startled laugh as she tumbled into a snowbank. When she looked up, Coulter was smiling, not a full grin, but the ghost of one, real and rough and fleeting. Later that week, a barn cat leapt into an open sack of flour, sending white powder everywhere. Edith gasped. Coulter blinked. Then, he chuckled. Low and warm. They laughed until tears burned their eyes. For once, it didn't matter that her cheeks were red, or that her apron no longer looked tidy. She laughed like a woman who hadn't been laughed with in years. But for Edith, the change was more than shared chores or soft glances. It was the way her hands trembled when he passed her the bread knife, the way her chest tightened when he looked at her and didn't look away, the way she caught herself hoping he'd stay just a moment longer each time he entered the room. She'd never had that before. Not from any man. Not from anyone. She'd always been the cook, the helper, the quiet one in the corner, never the woman someone saw. Until now. And that terrified her. That night, snow still clung to the edges of the roof as the moon rose in a wide, pale sky. Edith went out to the storage shed to fetch dried herbs. The cold bit through her shawl, and she fumbled with the latch. Edith! She turned. Coulter stood there, lantern in one hand, the other holding something wrapped in oilskin. I was looking for you. She straightened, trying to read his face. He stepped inside the shed, set the lantern on a barrel, and held out the parcel. What is it? She asked, her voice small. He unfolded the oilskin carefully, revealing a worn leather notebook. The edges were scuffed, the corners dog-eared, the cover soft from years of touch. This belonged to my mother, he said. She used to keep recipes, thoughts, little things she didn't want to forget. Edith reached for it, hesitant. He didn't let go. She told me once, Coulter said, voice low, that love doesn't come from the eyes. It comes from whatever still lives after the meal is gone. Edith swallowed hard. The warmth in the shed seemed to rise, though the air was frigid. Coulter finally released the book into her hands. I figured maybe you'd like to add to it. She looked down at the notebook, then back up at him. His face was quiet, steady, but his eyes held something raw, something real. Edith nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered. And for a long time, they stood there in the half-light of the shed, two people shaped by silence, beginning to find their words in each other. The thaw came slow that spring, but it came. Snow pulled back from the hills like a tired tide, leaving behind mud, bloom, and rumors. At first, it was just whispers around Powder Creek's mercantile and barber shop, that the cook-up at Grady Ranch had the boss staying late in the kitchen, that she wasn't just using flour in her biscuits, that maybe, just maybe, Coulter Grady had lost his mind, or at least his standards. Fat girl's got something in that stew of hers, one man laughed over a bottle. The town was small, mouths were quick, and bitterness traveled faster than any horse. Then came Caroline. She arrived in a fine carriage, boots too clean for the dirt roads, eyes too sharp for any real warmth. Her dark hair was pinned high and tight, her lips painted with something unnatural. The townsfolk remembered her well, Caroline Ash Grady, the belle who left town with a banker after Coulter lost his first cattle drive to drought. And now, she was back. Edith saw her for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, standing on the church steps in a green velvet dress that didn't belong to this land. Caroline's gaze scanned the faces exiting the chapel until it landed on Edith. She smiled. Not kindly. Not at all. The next day, Caroline rode up to Grady Ranch without warning. She stepped out like she owned the soil, waving at the hands who paused mid-task to stare. Coulter met her on the porch, arms crossed. Whatever they said, it was quiet, tense. Then Caroline marched toward the kitchen. Edith had just pulled a pie from the oven. Their eyes met. Caroline looked her over once, slowly, like a seamstress measuring a sack. "So, this is who you settled for," she said, voice loud enough for the stable hands to hear. "I suppose, when a man's pride breaks, he reaches for comfort food." Edith said nothing. Her hands gripped the counter behind her. Her heart was a hammer in her chest. "You know what they call you in town?" Caroline's smile widened. "The hog with the hearth, a pig in an apron." "As I." Laughter floated in from outside. Edith didn't know if it was for her. It didn't matter. She turned away, ran out the back door. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the woods, where the snow still lingered in patches. She collapsed beside a stump, trembling. Breath caught in her throat like a sob that wouldn't come. She had tried. She had been kind, quiet, hard-working. And still, it wasn't enough. Maybe it never would be. She didn't hear the approaching steps. "Edith." She turned. Coulter stood there, face dark, with something not quite anger but close. She wiped at her cheeks. "I should go," she whispered. I ain't worth this mess." He shook his head. "You think I care what that woman says?" "She's beautiful," Edith said bitterly. "You loved her once." "I thought I did," he replied, "before I knew the difference between being wanted and being used." Then he stepped past her, back toward the ranch house. She followed, half in fear, half in awe. He walked straight into the courtyard, where half the hands had gathered near the barn, where Caroline still stood as if she'd never been dismissed. Coulter stopped in the center of them all. Raised his voice, not loud, but steady. "Caroline," he said, "you left me because I didn't have enough money. Edith stayed because she has enough heart." A murmur rippled through the crowd. He looked around, eyes fierce. "Any man here who mocks the woman who's fed him for months can come find a new place to work." Silence. Even Caroline froze. Coulter turned back to Edith. And in front of everyone, every smirking hand, every wide-eyed onlooker, he took off his hat, stepped close, and said, "You want to go, Edith. I won't stop you. But if you stay knowing I choose you. Not out of pity, not because of what you cook, but because you're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen the man I could be." Her breath caught. The tears returned, but not from shame. And behind them, the ranch was still. The rains came late that spring, and with them, something far worse. It started with one of the younger hands, a wiry boy from a neighboring ranch. He collapsed after breakfast, shaking and feverish. Then 2 more fell ill by sundown. By morning, half the bunkhouse was moaning in their cots, sweat-soaked and pale. The doctor from Powder Creek came once, left twice as quick. "Bad meat," he said. "Probably came in with the last supply wagon from Dunlow Ridge. It's spreading fast. Keep them hydrated. Pray they hold on." Prayers were scarce out on the frontier. What the ranch had was Edith. She rolled up her sleeves, tied a rag over her mouth, and lit every burner in the kitchen. 3 nights. No sleep. No stopping. She boiled oats into thin porridge, mixed powdered charcoal into tonic water. Took advice from the Lakota woman who lived upriver. Boil willow bark, use yarrow, make tea from sage and birch. Edith scribbled down recipes with shaking hands, her apron stained with broth and fever sweat. Coulter helped where he could, carrying buckets, cleaning bedpans, holding heads as the sick heaved. But the kitchen, the heart of it all, that was Edith's. She didn't leave it. Not even once. Until her knees gave out. It was the 4th night. She was ladling soup when her vision blurred. The spoon clattered to the floor. She grabbed the edge of the counter, but her body gave up before her will did. She fell hard, the world spinning, her breath shallow. When she woke, the light was soft. A quilt was tucked up to her chin. The fire glowed low. And Coulter was there, sitting beside her on the floor, back to the hearth, elbows on his knees. He looked tired. But something else lived in his eyes too, something gentler. She tried to speak. He hushed her with a slight shake of his head. "You saved him," he said quietly. "Every one." Her lips trembled. "I couldn't do more." "You did everything." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers. "I watched you wear yourself thin for men who used to laugh at you, for a ranch that wasn't ever kind, for a man who took too damn long to say thank you." She blinked against tears. Coulter's voice dropped, barely more than breath. "If you're the hearth that keeps this place alive, then I'll be the roof." He squeezed her hand, gently. "I'll keep the storm off your back, I swear it." Edith didn't answer. She couldn't. Not with words. But her fingers curled into his, and in the silence that followed, something stronger than fever passed between them. By midsummer, the ranch had returned to its rhythm, hooves pounding earth, hammers echoing off barn walls, laughter rising from the bunkhouse like smoke from a fire. And Edith was walking again. Her strength had come back slowly, but each day she moved steadier, her color brighter. The hands stopped her in passing, with shy nods and awkward praise. A few even brought gifts, wild plums, a polished button, a carved spoon shaped like a heart. But it was the apron that left her speechless. One morning, after breakfast had been served and dishes cleared, she found it folded neatly on her work table. A deep green apron with soft linen ties, and stitched across the front, in careful thread, "The Keeper of Home's Taste." Beneath it, every hand had signed their name, even little Sam's, in crooked scrawl. She pressed it to her chest, and for the first time in her life, felt not just seen, but wanted. That evening, just before sundown, Coulter found her behind the barn feeding the chickens. "Come with me," he said. She followed him up the ridge that rose behind the ranch, the same one where the winter storms once rolled in like ghosts. Now, it bathed in orange and gold, tall grass whispering against their legs. At the top, the world opened wide. The ranch below glowed in the setting sun, fields stretching out like patchwork, smoke curling from chimneys, cattle grazing lazily in the distance. Edith breathed it in, eyes damp. "I come here when I forget why I started all this," Coulter said quietly beside her. "But I never forget now." She turned to him. His hat was in his hands, his face more open than she'd ever seen it. "I don't want a proper wife, Edith," he said. "Not the kind folks write poems about, not someone who fits some Sunday dress size. I want someone who gives like you, who wakes up thinking about other people's hunger and ends the day full of purpose. I want you." She froze. Her voice cracked. "I've never thought I was someone a man like you could love." Coulter stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "Then let me cook us a life, Edith, one where you're never hungry for love again." The sun dipped behind the hills, casting the ranch in long shadows. But in that moment, she felt nothing but light. 1 year later, Grady Ranch was no longer just known for its cattle. People rode in from as far as 10 miles away, not to buy stock, but to eat. Tucked beside the main barn, under a newly built awning with wildflowers climbing up its beams, stood a small, timber-walled eatery with a hand-painted sign above the door. Iron pot and painted heart. Locals called it Noi Sat and Tim Sun, after Edith's favorite phrase about love needing both strength and tenderness to last. The name stuck. Inside, long wooden tables lined the walls, candles melted into glass jars, and the air always smelled of baked cornbread, spiced stew, and something sweeter, something like comfort. Edith ran the kitchen with the same quiet grace she always had, but now she smiled more. Her apron bore the same embroidered words from that gift a year ago, "The Keeper of Home's Taste." And when someone called out, "Ma'am," they didn't mean it out of formality. They meant it with respect. "Mistress," the ranch hand said now, grinning, proud. The men who once laughed behind her back now lined up politely for a second helping of her hickory chicken. Some even brought their wives, who whispered thanks after tasting the pecan pie. "And Coulter?" Every night, after the last dish was served and the final lantern trimmed low, he would roll up his sleeves and head for the dish basin. No one questioned it, not even Edith. He still washed every plate by hand, quiet as ever. And sometimes, when no one was looking, he'd reach into his coat pocket, pull out a sprig of prairie clover or wild mint, and tuck it gently behind Edith's ear as she scrubbed a counter or stirred the last pot. She never stopped blushing. One evening, after closing, Edith sat alone at one of the tables, a letter spread before her. The lantern light flickered as she dipped her pen and began to write. It was a reply to a girl from a neighboring town, a girl who had written timidly, asking how she could ever be loved if boys only laughed at her shape. Edith stared at the letter for a long time before writing. "I used to believe the same thing. I thought love only came for the slim, the shiny, the bold. I thought I had to wait for someone to choose me before I could belong. But that was before I learned the secret. You don't wait for love to find you. You become love. You pour it into your cooking, your kindness, your laughter, your stubborn hope. You feed the world with your fire. And maybe, just maybe, someone good will smell the warmth in your kitchen and decide to stay." She ended the letter with a smile and one last line. "Don't wait to be chosen, sweetheart. Choose yourself first, and if you're lucky, someone worthy will choose you too." She folded it, sealed it with wax, and stepped outside. Above her, the stars blinked like stories waiting to be told. And inside, the fire still burned. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that love doesn't follow rules, appearances, or what the world says is deserving, then this is your sign to believe again. Because somewhere out there, someone is still choosing kindness, still believing in slow, steady love, still stirring the pot for more than just flavor, but for home. If you felt the warmth of Edith's courage and Coulter's quiet devotion, tap that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Here, we tell tales where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. New stories every week, of love that defied storms, shame, and the silence of the prairie. Subscribe now, and ride with us into the heart of the untamed West.